All right, good morning. Hope you all are doing well. So we started talking about some of the operators last time. So we'll be going as we go through chapter 4, we'll be introducing some of the new operators. And we started to look at the offset operator towards the end last time. And we saw that it really was used to get the address of something. Because we've seen all along that the default behavior is that when you're working with a variable, right, is that you get the value, whether we were using the brackets or not using the brackets. And we mentioned before that it's because of the fact that the assembler is doing the automatic dereferencing. So that's why when we say things like, for example, move EAX ARR1, where that might be the name of an array, why that's going to move the first value in the array. And same thing if we also put the ARR1 inside of brackets, right? We also saw that that as well was going to move the first value. And then also if we add some sort of offset, right, it was still going to move a value, whether we did or did not use those square brackets. And so then that, leads to the issue of, well, how are we going to get the address? Because sometimes that's what you need to do, right? Sometimes you need to refer to the address of different variables or identifiers from your data segment. And there's a couple ways you can do that, but one way that we've seen is the offset operator. So the offset operator is again used to get the address. And we'll eventually think about these things in terms of loops as well, because that would be, the next step. But, here we might want to use register ESI to help us do things like process the array, because we mentioned really back in chapter 2 that that's commonly what register ESI and EDI are used for, right? Is for as our source index and destination index. So we commonly use those two registers to help us do things like, in this case, process the elements of the array. And one way we can use those registers is effectively as a pointer, right? Meaning storing a memory address. So just in the same sense, right, that you can have a variable store the address of another variable, right? We call that a pointer variable. you can also have a register act as a pointer as well by having it store the address of some variable that we've defined. And so here we've initialized ESI in this case to store the starting address of array 1. And then maybe, for example, we want to add up all the elements in the array and store them in EAX. Initialize EAX to 0 here. And so here, notice what we did is we used those brackets. We've used the brackets before with variable names a lot. We said that the brackets were optional, right, with the variable names, but that it was a good idea when you were, calculating an offset, at least to use it, because as a reminder of the fact that you are doing the dereferencing. Here would be an example where we really do, right, have to use the brackets, right, because it's going to be wrong without the brackets. Because we have to take into account, what we did to set up ESI to begin with, right? We said move ESI offset ARR1, or move the starting memory address of array 1 into register ESI. And so that means that, if we forgot the brackets or didn't have the brackets, then we have to think about, well, what would we be trying to add in that case? Because, if we didn't have the brackets, we just, try to do something like this, well, that's going to be a problem, right? Because ESI is storing an address, but the whole point of using EAX here is when this is all done, is we want to store the sum, right, of all 5 of these numbers. So when we get to the add, the add instruction here, we're talking about adding 2 things: EAX's current value and whatever ESI is pointing at, right? So what we have to keep in mind is that there's a huge difference between saying ESI and then ESI inside brackets, because ESI inside brackets that's a memory operand, right? That's not really a register operand in terms of the actual value that we're going to finally return. Because this is ultimately, whenever we refer to this, assuming that we've set up ESI correctly, which we did up here, but whenever we make a reference to ESI inside of brackets, right, that's referring to an element from ARR1. But we're doing it, of course, indirectly through a pointer. So ESI, in this case, is acting as a pointer. And so that's how we're going to grab, the current value from the array and then be able to add it to EAX. So EAX here, as usual, is just acting as our accumulator, as it often does. And so here, then what we're really doing is EAX equals its current value plus, and then in this case, next 0, if we want to think of it that way, right? 0 plus 1, and we end up with 1 there. Right, and then we, if we want to get the sum of the rest of the elements, then we can keep going in a similar type fashion. And so one thing that we can do here, because this also gives you an idea of things that would happen, if we were doing this in terms of a loop. But we can also think about updating ESI.